President Trump is threatening to send U.S. troops to Nigeria. Guns are blazing, according to him, to wipe out Islamist terrorists who are carrying out a mass slaughter of Christians there. But Nigeria says no such thing exists, that the targeted killings affect both Christians and Muslims, that terrorism is the real issue here, and the U.S. has been a partner in dealing with that. They say it's also a struggle for resources between herders and farmers, and they say there is no genocide of Christians in Nigeria. President Trump's own advisor, a Lebanese-American businessman who made his fortune in Nigeria, addressed this and said it does not target Christians specifically.
People of all religions and all tribes are dying as a result of terrorist acts, but it's very unfortunate. We even know that Boko Haram and ISIS are killing more Muslims than Christians. So people are suffering from all sorts of backgrounds.
President Trump is threatening to send U.S. troops.
As stated, Trump threatened Nigeria. U.S. troops warning sparks China backing and TINUBU'S interesting response. Welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream where we talk about all things news pertaining to the continent of Africa. Before we get into today's stories, we'd like to do some intros, so I'll turn it over to my co-host before I introduce myself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gloria Ayo. I am the co-host of This Week in Africa with the one and only Authentic African, who I must add, y'all have no clue what the hoops this man has to jump through to ensure that he comes live every time he comes live. So kudos to you, Joe, for all you do.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. It is a struggle, to say the least. I'm in a WeWork in New York City as we speak. Had to find a conference room because it was very loud earlier, but we found one. It is not soundproof, so I won't be as loud as I normally am. And so forgive me, but yes, we have a lot of stories to cover today. We want to make sure that you guys hear them. So with that, just a real quick roundup of what we'll be talking about today. Number one, as you heard, Trump threatened to send U.S. troops to Nigeria. Then, of course, we have a comment from Bola Tinubu, the president of Nigeria, saying the portrayal of Nigeria as religiously intolerant is not our reality. And then China backs Nigeria after Trump's threat over quote unquote Christian killings. We'll talk about the Sudan, what happened in Sudan with the famine. We'll talk about how the UAE is closely involved in what's happening in Sudan. And then lastly, we'll talk about the aftermath of the election in Tanzania. So with that, let's get into the next video. This here is a video of Bola Tinubu, the president of Nigeria, dismissing U.S. President Donald Trump's claim of a mass slaughter of Christians in Nigeria, insisting that portraying the country as religiously intolerant does not reflect its reality. Responding on Saturday, President Tinubu, in a statement he personally signed, dismissed claims that Nigeria is hostile towards Christians, insisting the country remains committed to religious freedom and tolerance. I want to be clear that this comment was a written comment, not a verbal speech. There is videos now of people posting saying that is in response to Donald Trump. You may have seen those viral videos. Those videos are from 2 months ago, where he says, I'm not worried about Trump is doing it, what Trump is doing in America. That is not his response. This is going to be the response. It'll be read by a local news station on the continent. So we will play this video and then have some commentary on the other side.
President Bola Tinubu today made a strong rebuttal to U.S. President Donald Trump's allegations of religious persecution in Nigeria, saying the country does not tolerate it. In a strongly worded statement, President Tinubu asserts Nigeria's commitment to religious freedom, emphasizing that the Constitution guarantees protection for all citizens regardless of faith. According to him, religious freedom and tolerance has always been a core tenet of the collective identity and shall always remain so for Nigeria. He added that the characterization of Nigeria as religiously intolerant does not reflect, in his words, our national reality, nor does it take into consideration the consistent and sincere efforts of the government to safeguard freedom of religion and beliefs for all Nigerians. He made it clear that his administration has maintained an open engagement with Christian and Muslim leaders to strengthen national unity, and address security challenges affecting communities across the country. The president added that Nigeria is willing to work with the U.S. and other international partners to promote understanding and cooperation on protecting communities of all faith.
All right. So your thoughts on, first of all, the background of the story, because I think we do need to give some context, right? There's some conversations about, is this a Christian genocide? One, Trump's advisor in the original video speaking to the fact that it is not just Christians experiencing loss of life from Boko Haram and from ISIS. And then TINUBU'S response. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of those fronts, Gloria.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to state candidly that I am not a fan of threats to a nation, even if it's just implied. Whether or not we agree with the government in power, calling Nigeria a disgraced nation is not acceptable. We've seen what Western military interventions in places like Somalia, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, we've seen what they caused. Mm-hmm. But the irony, Joe, is that this same government actually invited the U.S. to interfere in our insecurity issues back when they were the opposition. Matter of fact, that approach is part of what got them in power. So what are they disputing? They did deploy rhetoric that strongly implied a deliberate or at least incompetent and negligent failure of the then government to stop the systematic killing of Christians. This isn't the first time Nigeria has faced the CPC designation. The US, actually under Trump, placed Nigeria on the list during his first term as president. But some would tell you that it's a lot more complicated than that. That if this affects all people, regardless of religion, then the US is missing that. Some would tell you that it's about land. We've discussed this before: land, resource scarcity, climate change. Others would tell you that Christians have actually been targeted specifically, and that unless one is from those communities where these cases are underreported, we're not in a position to dismiss these issues. Some have questioned the US's motive. We know Nigeria is Africa's largest oil producer. Nigeria has rare earth elements and critical elements that the globe needs when you're talking about global technology, when you're talking about defense supply chains. So some are skeptical and even suspicious of the United States motives. Some have even gone further to suggest that this threat may just be a way to force the Nigerian government to make concessions on trade, to make concessions on military cooperation, to allow access to resources, and that is not actually a genuine interest in Nigeria's, in Christians being liberated, as it were. Some even see this as America's way of appeasing conservative and evangelical political groups in the US. We've seen a lot of reactions from groups throughout the world, actually, that are in support of what Trump said of the United States. I have actually seen a lot of hilarious memes around this. But interestingly, some people do believe that America would actually come to, I don't know why some believe that America is going to come attack Nigeria. But let me just make something clear. Yes, the US military presence in West Africa has actually seemed threatening, but the focus has always been on training, intelligence sharing, advising people on how to counter terrorism, often through AFRICOM. So if we're thinking there's going to be some kind of direct intervention in a nation as sovereign and strategically vital as Nigeria, that would actually be a stretch, I think. That would actually be a stretch, because international law actually prohibits the use of force inside another sovereign state without consent or without the UN Security Council approval. But I think regarding whether or not this is a genocide on Christians, what makes this far more confusing than it should be is because these cases are actually underreported. Generally, all cases are underreported. We don't have sufficient data. So once again, Nigerians are divided, And speaking of this very, because I keep talking about the division and what brought us here, again, it takes us to the amalgamation of 1914, which I discussed on my page when I was talking the African story that I do on my page. Joe, you were actually a collaborator on that. I recently talked about borders being created and what they have done to Africa. Here is a consequence of these lines that were drawn across Africa, splitting ethnic groups and grouping countries like Nigeria together for the British colonizer strategic interest. Because clearly we are ideologically different. And since we've hardly had governments that come in to unify us, I'm afraid, Joe, that this story may keep being the same. But America coming in, the West coming in, will only worsen the division. Let's learn from other countries.
100%. Well put. And just two things that I'll add there. One, what the implication is that this is the work of Boko Haram and ISIS, who, obviously were where the unalivement of large numbers of people happen through the perversion of Islam. Right. And so what can and does happen frequently is that other groups are targeted and other people who practice Islam differently from the terrorists who are executing people. Right. Many times they execute people who sympathize with other people of other religions. So there is a possibility that this could be that other people from Islamic faith are being unalived because they may be supporting and or living with other people of Christian faith. We don't know. But what we do know is that when the United States signals something, they generally do something, right? When countries like Venezuela we'll say El Salvador, even when certain people are designated as terrorists, they're designated as certain things, certain actions happen. U.S. mobilizes military with ships in that area. There have been attempted regime changes in Latin America, even under the previous administration, the previous Trump administration. That his team is not, the people, especially like a Marco Rubio, are not that adverse to regime change. So to all your points, regime change never works. Every time the United States has participated in regime change, they either had to stay in that country in perpetuity or they've completely demolished the country. So Japan, where we bombed, we obviously have Korea, where we've been in war with, Germany, right? In all of those instances, the United States has kept troops there in perpetuity and will always, right? And there's always been the attempt to try to keep those countries going. For countries that the United States doesn't care if they maintain their status quo from before we came in there, Libya, Iraq, as you mentioned, and many other countries around the world, they're left to the vacuum of power that they have, and you see what happens to those countries. So I just want to mention that to those folks. And then there's one other thing I would say, which has been reported on a little bit, but we don't have enough information on as of yet. But a number of senior military leaders have been fired in Nigeria over the last week. And there's a lot of questions about whether or not this was an attempted coup, because a number of people were fired. And so those things could be related. They could not be related. But these are all things that we'll be watching, and we will definitely keep you guys posted on as time goes on. Now, there's more to this story, right? That was up until Saturday. Well, since then, in the last 24 hours, China has stepped in to defend Nigeria's sovereignty, warning against foreign interference under the guise of human rights or religion. Beijing reaffirmed its status as Nigeria's quote-unquote comprehensive strategic partner, emphasizing the country's development. Nigeria is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, with over 1.3 billion in Chinese investment in Nigeria's lithium and mineral sectors, as you mentioned. And since 2023, The dispute now extends beyond politics, placing Africa's largest economy at the center of a global power structure between Washington and Beijing. We got a video that we'll watch, and then we will have some commentary on the other side.
Let's now shift focus to growing tensions between the United States and Nigeria. This over Trump's military action threat and the Christian killings claim. Now, China has become a party in this row, as it emphasized its unwavering support for Nigeria's sovereignty. Beijing asserted itself as Abuja's comprehensive strategic partner and warned against any foreign interference in Nigeria under the guise of human rights or religion.
As a comprehensive strategic partner, China firmly supports the Nigerian government in leading its people on a development path in line with its national conditions. China opposes any country interfering in other countries' internal affairs under the pretext of religion or human rights and opposes the frequent use of sanctions and threats of force.
China's support for Nigeria is more than diplomatic solidarity. It has economic aspects to it, as Nigeria is a key partner in China's Key Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI, which aims to connect Asia, Europe and Africa through a corridor resulting in heavy investment by Chinese companies in Nigeria's infrastructure, energy and mining projects. A report suggests Nigeria is one of the top African destinations for direct Chinese foreign investment in sectors like oil, natural gas and solid minerals, including lithium and gold. In May 2025, the Chinese ambassador in Abuja met with the Nigerian Minister of Solid Minerals Development. After the talks, he announced that mining cooperation between China and Nigeria has achieved remarkable progress. According to reports, Chinese firms have invested over $1.3 billion in Nigeria's lithium processing sector since September of 2023. These investments are aimed at diversifying Nigeria away from oil and developing green energy-related minerals.
All right, so this video is about double the length of what we played, but we will leave it there. So now it seems like there's a bit of an escalation, right? China making very clear their stance in backing Nigeria. What are your thoughts, Gloria, on China stepping in and loudly communicating its support?
This is why when people say Africa is poor, I laugh, because if Africa is so poor, why are all these countries so interested in what's going on? But what we're seeing now is the geopolitical competition between Washington and Beijing for influence in Africa. China's statement is so significant because it actually directly challenges the approach that the US is taking, while also reaffirming its own relationship with Nigeria. So this is actually a really good look for Nigeria, because it's basically providing a powerful counterweight to the pressure from Washington. China's foreign influence or policy in Africa is built on the principle of non-interference in internal affairs. This is actually a huge contrast when you're thinking about how the West approaches things on the continent in general. And as we've discussed before, this approach makes China seem to be the better partner. That's why you see people sympathizing with Russia, sympathizing with China, or aligning with Russia and China, because they feel that they're not interfering in our affairs. Now, Nigeria is actually, as mentioned in that video, Nigeria is a crucial partner in China's Belt and Road Initiative. And China has actually invested heavily in Nigeria's infrastructure, in energy, in solid minerals like lithium and gold. Matter of fact, there are reports that Chinese firms have poured over $1.3 billion into Nigeria's lithium processing industry alone in recent years. So while some might see this as altruistic, I think it's a calculated move, basically to safeguard those very substantial economic investments and secure access to vital resources in Africa's largest market, which is Nigeria. Because if the US interferes, it would compromise China's interest. And I know that some would like to think that China loves us oh so much, but I insist that we don't need any outsider to come save us, because we have all it takes. But if you must come in, do so respectfully and so far, China actually seems far more respectful than the West has been. But ultimately, Nigeria is now finding itself at the center of a tense modern day Cold War struggle for influence. The US remains Nigeria's largest foreign investor, though. And the US is a major provider of security cooperation, things like firearms, arms sales, training, intelligence. So Nigeria accepting China's support and aligning itself with Beijing could actually go against the US. And that could lead to full suspension of crucial military and humanitarian aid. And your boy Trump he's all about getting his vengeance on. So, yeah.
Well put. Yeah, and look, you heard it in that video, and Gloria summed it up. I think, obviously China, they have an exact opposite view as the West, as you mentioned, non-interference versus interference. Now, the United States or the West tends to interfere only in places where they can have a heavy hand. They do not interfere in Saudi Arabia at all, right? You will not hear any interference from the United States as it pertains to Saudi Arabia. Very little interference as it pertains to Israel
Sudan
as well. Sudan. How about other countries on the continent of Africa? And it really all depends on where they can have that level of influence. Now, yes, as you mentioned, I think it's very important to discuss China's financial reasons for wanting to back Nigeria, right? And to show strong support. Look, China does have rare earth minerals, but there is no continent that has the level of rare earth minerals that Africa has. And there's no continent that sells it as cheaply as Africa does, right? So the access to those minerals and the idea of being a better partner when you have the lesser of two evils as it pertains to the eyes of those who are making these deals. I remember watching a video of a woman who worked for the IMF, and she mentioned that her boss was like, I love doing deals in Africa. They never negotiate. They always give us what we want. He's like, when we go to Asia and we go to Europe, we're always negotiating back and forth. It takes long to negotiate. He said, Africans always take the first deal we give them. So easy. And I think that is something that we should be thinking about, because that is why China has such a strong investment on the continent. And that's why so many people on the continent will be praising China so much, because the small infrastructural changes that you see happening across the continent is enough for everybody to be fine with everything else that China does there, right? And so I do want to just make it clear that the idea that the United States not being the best partner doesn't mean that the alternative is the best, right? It's just different, maybe better, maybe it's just the least worst option. We always come back to the same thing. As Pan-Africanists, we should be working on trade on the continent with each other. There are so many rare earth minerals on the continent. So much of the world runs on those rare earth minerals. And if we work together with collective bargaining across even larger groups, it doesn't have to be all 54 countries, but even if multiple countries got together, the chain, it's like a union. There are unions at organizations for a reason around certain things. That's the reason why you see coal mines having to change the way they do things. That's the reason why you see certain car companies having to change the way that the work hours are. There's a reason why there are, paid leave, maternity leave. All these things come out of unions forcing institutions to make changes. So imagine if the continent of Africa acted as a union against all these trade deals they're having with other people, how much more you would see the continent thrive. We'd like to see it. We're not seeing it today. We're just reporting on what we see. With that, let's move on to Sudan. As we reported in recent weeks, El-Fasher has been taken by the RSF, a city ravaged by civil war. There was actually somebody recently abducted and believed to be and it's believed that he has been taken in South Darfur. The Sudanese ambassador to India confirmed coordination with New Delhi to ensure his safe release. Meanwhile, El-Fasher's fall marks the major setback in Sudan's army and reports of famine, war crimes, and mass displacement. As Sudan's humanitarian crisis deepens, the US administration under Donald Trump, in some cases, is pushing for a ceasefire. We haven't seen much, but we'll see this video and we will have some commentary on the other side.
Now to some updates from Sudan, a country that has been left battered and bruised due to an ongoing civil war. Now, an Indian origin man has reportedly been kidnapped by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF. The 36-year-old was abducted from El-Fasher, the city marred by violence after the RSF's recent takeover. According to reports, the man identified as Adarsh Behera is from the eastern Indian coastal state of Odisha. He is believed to have been taken to Nyala, an RSF stronghold in South Darfur. He has been reportedly working for a Sudanese plastic factory since 2022. And now his family has sought government intervention to secure his release. Soon after Behera's kidnapping made headlines, Sudan's ambassador to India said the country is coordinating with Indian authorities.
We have been in close contact with India's Ministry of External Affairs ever since reports emerged about the Indian national who was captured. We are coordinating closely with both the Sudanese authorities and the Indian Ministry of External Affairs to ensure his safety and release.
There's a lot more that we want to cover. This video is a little bit longer. We won't go into it. But one of the things I will mention is, this is becoming international news because a Indian national has been taken captive. But what I've seen from the RSF videos, viral videos of them holding human flesh and pretending like they're eating it and laughing and like shaking it around in the air, it is something I've never seen before. It's something I've never seen before. And I've seen a lot of very heinous crimes when it comes to rebel groups doing these kinds of things. This is on another level. It's something that I've never seen before. But anyway, Gloria, your thoughts on this story now making international news because an Indian national has been taken captive, and everything that's happened since the fall of El-Fasher.
Yeah, it's just so sad. I mean, we've talked about this repeatedly, the silence of the international community, the silence of the media. We just talked about Trump threatening to intervene in Nigeria, but we ain't heard nothing from Washington, nothing substantial from Washington regarding what is going on in Sudan. And then later on, we all want to cry about immigration issues when these are the things. Who would not want to escape to more stable societies? And, Joe, you've pointed out that in the West, for instance, if you want to go in the streets to protest, chances are you're protected. It's not to say America hasn't been clamping down on free speech lately, but there is a higher probability of you being protected than if you tried it on African soil. So it's unfortunate that it takes something this severe for the world to start paying attention. And I really empathize with the families and loved ones of the man who got taken by this group. It's just really, really sad because now this isn't even a case of a natural disaster. This is a man-made catastrophe that's led to a group, specifically the RSF, capturing people and weaponizing famine, things like famine, cutting off aid, cutting off access for people to live well. And we have one man of Indian heritage being, captured. And I also want to emphasize, in addition to that, we also need people to pay attention to Sudan because Sudanese lives are also very important. People have been reduced to surviving on leaves, to surviving on animal feed. People are eating grass to stay alive. We will not understand the gravity of what is going on. Even with all the videos we've seen, like Joe, you said this was something you had never seen before. all kinds of atrocities that are on camera. Imagine the ones that are not being recorded. So yeah, we just need more. We need more. And I'm noticing a cooling down on I'm noticing a cooling down, and it's very concerning because what are we being quiet for? The situation is still going on. I also want to say to fellow people in the content space, fellow people in the Pan-African space, let's not wait. I'm not accusing anyone, but let's not wait till something becomes a trending topic before we talk about it.
100%. And that's the reason why we continue to talk about it here, because we want to make sure that you guys are all aware of how important this is. What's happening is not normal, right? And we know that, we've become accustomed to, these paramilitary groups doing gruesome and atrocious things on the continent, and we've kind of just let it just be. And you every once in a while you see the pray for Sudan, pray for Congo, but mostly the focus is on pray for Palestine. And I think we can pray for all. I think we can focus on all, but we have to also remember that we on the continent need to continue to share these stories, as you mentioned, because if we don't, no one will. And we also need to talk about who has been accused of being a part of these atrocities, namely the UAE. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this next video. Since the RSF seized Sudan's city of El-Fasher, unaliving thousands of civilians, pro-UAE influencers have filled social media with posts attacking Sudan's army and deflecting blame. The online campaign comes amid mounting evidence of Emirati support for the RSF, accused of committing atrocities across Darfur. In fact, Israeli accounts, including a state-owned or state-run Arabic channel, have joined the effort, sharing identical content that links Sudan's army to Hamas. If you can link Sudan's army to Hamas, and if Hamas, for those who have been on the side of Israel, is seen as a terrorist group, and I think many people understand the atrocities that happened on October 7th, not talking about the context of anything that happened before, and obviously everything that's happened since. But the idea is that they think that if they link Sudan's army to Hamas, then you might be sympathetic to RSF, even though we all can see with our plain eyes what the RSF is doing. So I want to play a video here talking about the influencers and the campaigns they've been up to propagandize and explain away and apologize for the acts of the RSF.
Why are UAE-based influencers targeting Sudan online?
والله العظيم لو بيدي أنا حرام لا أخليكم ذكريات والله ولا تصيروا شيء ما بنفضكم.
Another sang taunting Sudanese civilians.
أبو لولو أبو لولو جاينكو أبو لولو جاينكو.
Abu Lulu, the RSF militia commander who bragged about killing over 2,000 civilians and filmed himself executing them. And a third.
بتبكون دم أنتم مطولون شعرة من محمد بن زايد شعرة مطولونها.
As evidence of the RSF's massacres in El-Fasher emerges and UAE support for the paramilitary group continues, these influencers and seemingly bots have tried to shift the blame to the Sudanese army and away from the RSF war crimes. And some of these posts are extremely racist. One even replied to a post about the UAE exploiting Sudan's gold, saying monkeys don't have gold. One of the most vocal in this online campaign is Amjad Taha. He's UAE-based, positions himself as an analyst, and frequently appears on Western media. He has consistently linked Sudan's army to Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, framing the Sudanese armed forces as the Hamas of Africa. This week, he shared images of two families, One an Israeli family, the other a Sudanese family, claiming both were victims of Muslim Brotherhood-led forces. In reality, Middle East Eye could not find any evidence that the Sudanese family was killed by the army. Following Taha, other Emirati and UAE-based influencers piled on, sharing Taha's video and calling the Sudanese army the Hamas of Africa. Then on
We'll leave it there. Your thoughts on monkeys don't have gold and all the rest that we just heard in that video.
What a sad thing to watch. I mean, these videos are just proof. They've confirmed the worst fears about the objectives of the RSF, and obviously the backing by certain Arab people. You know, this is the evidence. Initially, it was whispers, it was suspicion, but I mean, we're getting more confirmation as the days go by. For them to be so brazen to come on camera and make these comments tells you that they are confident in the fact that they feel that they will continue to control Sudan and continue to unalive and displace the people. Because clearly there is a systematic elimination of the non-Arab civilian population, and the world again is silent. To weaponize famine, to weaponize, just these military aids or military weapons that they have in their possession, and to keep using that to suppress the people is sad. I mean, the IPC has actually taken it to a level 5. The famine, I mean, when it's at a level 5, that means it's straight famine. Okay, that's the integrated food security phase classification. Once it's at level 5, and that rarely happens, but this is what is going on in Sudan. And why, once again, we cannot be silent. If we keep being silent, there will be more videos like this being put out. And again, they're putting that out because the world is too silent. If there was enough noise, they wouldn't be so brazen, they wouldn't be so bold. Monkeys have gold. Wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah, and just to add to what you're saying, right? Obviously, this is alleged, and but you see that the citizens of the UAE are bold enough to know that there will be no consequences, whether that is social, political, or financial, for their support of terroristic activities. These are influencers, political commentators who go and online and in other, areas where they are, I don't know what the word is. I'm trying to look for the word, but basically there are media outlets that are legitimizing them by having them on and allowing them to spread this rhetoric. I think it's really important for us to pay attention to what's happening here. We, of course, are not ourselves saying for sure it's the UAE, but we are reporting on reviewing what people are reporting, right? And it does seem, if you feel like there's no political consequences, no social, no financial consequences, that does lead to more people believing that is the case. As Gloria mentioned, it used to be whispers. Now they're shouting from the rooftops with bullhorns, right? So, I don't know what happens next, but you have to understand that Sudan also has a lot of rare earth minerals, and specifically gold. And, there are many countries that benefit from these rare earth minerals, including the UAE. So those of you who are unaware, I know many of you have heard me say this before, but people are not always clear on what the UAE is, right? There are, I think, 7 emirates, right, as part of the UAE. Ones that you might be familiar with are Abu Dhabi and, of course, Dubai, right? So for those of you who are wondering who's the UAE, what is that? Just, you can just Google it, look it up. You guys are aware of Dubai, of course, because many people like to celebrate birthdays there, apparently. But, it is a place that is now being more and more attached to what's happening in these atrocities with the RSF. So pay close attention, and we will keep you guys posted as more information comes out. With that, we have our last story, and we're moving to Tanzania. which is facing global outrage after the opposition accuses security forces of secretly dumping the bodies of protesters unalive during post-election violence. Following this disputed presidential polls on October the 29th, demonstrations erupted across Dar es Salaam and other cities over alleged vote rigging. Opposition party claims more than 800 people were unalived, while President Hassan blames foreign interference. Human Rights Watch condemned the unaliving during protests after reported excessive use of force and internet blackouts, as we talked about last week, urging accountability. Observers from the Southern African Development Community also stated the election fell short of democratic standards, intensifying pressures on the Tanzanian government. So we're going to watch this video and have some commentary on the other side.
Hello and welcome. Today we begin with the latest updates from Tanzania, where the country's security forces are accused of secretly dumping the bodies of protesters after a wave of election violence that may have killed hundreds. But before we tell you more about that, take a look at these videos. They show what transpired on the streets of Tanzania last week, especially in the country's economic capital, Dar es Salaam, which was most affected by the election violence. For context, let's give you a quick recap of what's happened. On October the 29th, Tanzanians stepped out to vote in the presidential election, but an election without opposition and President Samia Suluhu Hassan's slated victory irked people. The citizens took to the streets to protest an election which they believed wasn't free and fair. This led to a crackdown by security agencies with live bullets and tear gas canisters fired. Those protest videos came out after the government partially lifted its curfew and internet blackout restrictions imposed after the protests. Reports suggest an excessive use of force by security forces to quell dissent. The country's largest opposition, the Chadema Party, claimed that the crackdown killed more than 800 people. And upping its ante against the Hassan government, the opposition has now accused the security forces of secretly dumping bodies.
So we reported on this last week, the election, the aftermath of the election. Numbers are coming out. 800 people is what they are saying have experienced loss of life. Your thoughts, Gloria, on what's been happening in Tanzania?
I actually I've seen reports of over 1,000 people. Have actually some people have said over 1,000. This is very, very sad. You know, I can't even emphasize just how sad this is. I don't know if you saw the post that was shared yesterday by you, Joe, regarding our analysis on the Tanzanian protests and the reaction of the president, Samia Hassan. And in the comments, you could see Tanzanians basically begging, like desperately, like, we need help, we need help. It's just so chilling, you know, it's such a chilling time to be alive, to witness something like this. And this is a woman who's claiming, yeah, she's the one claiming that 97 to 98% of the vote went in her favor. Yet you felt the need to actually hold your ceremony at a military parade ground. Why didn't you do it publicly, as is the norm? You know, like a football stadium. This way, there are massive public displays of this popular support that you claim you got. And there has been proof, regardless of whether or not the president wants to deny it. We have seen, or we have heard accounts of military trucks, allegedly, loaded with bodies that have been seen leaving hospital mortuaries. So people are suspecting that victims are being buried in unmarked or secret sites, such as forests. And if we, you know, by doing that, they're preventing official counting and identification. So this is what is going on with Samia Suluhu Hassan's government. I want to say her name as many times as I can. And for you in your inauguration speech to say you are acknowledging the loss of life and you're talking to security agents to please ensure a return to normalcy. There's nothing normal about what you have done. and what you continue to do. You have forced yourself on the people who have rejected you, and for you to use these authoritarian measures just says a lot about who you really are. Justice for everybody involved, justice for the families of those loved ones, justice for those people whose bodies are yet to be found, and shame on Samia Suluhu Hassan. Shame on you.
Yeah, well put. I mean, look, you said it all. I think as we continue to follow this story, we'll let you know how things tend to keep going. And one of the things, or how things progress. One of the things I do want to mention is that last week when we talked about, is she more of the same? Is she just a female face to what we had seen previously? There were some comments and some folks that were really upset by what I had said in talking about, you know, this idea that the former president did not have any of the same kind of practices that that we see in this current administration. So I do want to quickly address that because it did come up in some of the comments. People specifically said this channel really thinks that President Magufuli was a bad president. Please give me an answer. I'm wondering the same thing. Someone else said the way he fought against bribery and corruption was amazing. Another positive aspect of his administration was how he held officials accountable for the work they were supposed to be doing. He limited extravagant expenses and travel for government officials, including himself. Any suggestion that he and the current president have similar political leadership is wild to me. Now, I think it's important to understand that propaganda is propaganda, right? And two things still can be true. So yes, of course, everyone is always going to talk about the things that they're doing to curb corruption. Every president who has ever been corrupt will tell you we've curbed corruption, we fired officials, we've done all kinds of different things. I think the thing is, they were just better at expressing that publicly and minimizing what they had been doing on the other side. This is a party that's been in power for 77 years, right? So just keep that in mind. And so they have the ability to be able to, one, quell competition, obviously do internet blackouts, all kinds of things that they can do. So remember that an opposition leader was shot 17 times in 2017, had to leave, came back, was arrested, just so that they could stop him from communicating. Now, when he was shot in 2017, that was under President Magufuli and Vice President Hassan, right? That's just to be clear. Now, that's not to say they did that, but it happened when they were president and vice president, and he was the main opposition leader. There were other methods used during his reign from 2015 to 2021 to ban political rallies. He weaponized the law. He had attacks on media, out of arbitrary arrest and violence. All of these things were main things that were done that are very similar, very similar, but not to the same extent maybe to what we are seeing under the current administration. So I do want to make sure that we're all aware of these things because it seems as though the folks who responded to that previous video when we talked about, is this more of the same? We're not aware of those things. So we just want to make sure you guys are all aware. Anything you want to add to that before we close this thing out?
Yeah, so basically it's a case of, I've said this before, when our governments get progressively worse, we start romanticizing past leaders. Those who responded to you, Joe, I don't know if they were necessarily, I don't want to assume that it was propaganda, because you do have governments. I've seen a pattern of governments, at least I can't speak about Tanzania necessarily, but I've seen a pattern of former governments having people out there on the internet to clean up whatever they did and, try to rewrite their history. I have seen that happen. Right. So I don't know if that is the case here, but it could at the very least be a case of a government that has gotten progressively worse, and then we romanticize the leader who was there before. Magufuli, with all due respect, was not a hero. However you want to paint it, he was not a hero, because Samia seems way worse does not mean Magufuli, like Joe said, two things can be true. He might have had his areas of opportunity. And please, I expect that as somebody in power, you did some things right, for crying out loud. Even a dead clock is right 2 times a day. So you're doing your job, doing certain things right. You're not doing me a favor. You're a public servant. That's what you were hired to do. So if we want to romanticize, we can even look at Samia's record and say she did X, Y, Z. I mean, when she first came in, there were things she put in place that people liked. So I'm not romanticizing any past leader who, no, what we should be striving for are better leaders. I completely stand with you, Joe.
And there it is. And I appreciate that. And so we just wanted to make sure we gave you additional context to that, so that, you know, everyone understands that we look at everything fairly and from all sides, and we want to make sure that everyone's aware of all the details as they become available. There was a very, very good video that walked through the history of things prior to Hassan being president. We didn't have time to go over it today, but, you know, just do your Googles. On that note, we are at time. So want to thank you guys all for watching. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell on every channel here, associated here. Go to The Gloria Ayo, follow, like, comment, subscribe, and do the same thing on Authentic African. And with that, thanks for watching. We will see you guys all next week. Bye, guys.